The most powerful weapon in modern conflict isn't a missile. It isn't a drone, a cyber attack, or a nuclear warhead. It's a decision. Specifically, the decision to make your opponent believe that fighting is pointless before a single battle begins. This is called coercion strategy, and the countries that understand it win conflicts that never officially start, control outcomes that were never officially contested, and accumulate power that never shows up in any military casualty report. While the world watches the weapons, the real war is already over. Here's how it works. The goal of military force, in its simplest form, is to change what the other side does. You want them to stop doing something, leave a territory, abandon a program, change a government. Whatever the objective is, the point of the military instrument is to change behavior. The traditional approach uses force directly. You fight until one side can't continue. The smarter approach does something more sophisticated. It uses the threat of force, or the demonstration of capability, to change behavior without the fight. If you can make your opponent believe that fighting will cost more than conceding, they will concede. No battle required. This sounds simple. It is extraordinarily difficult to execute, and the gap between how it's supposed to work and how it actually works explains most of the strategic failures of the last 50 years. Stay with me, because the mechanics of coercion break down in ways that are completely predictable once you understand them. The first thing coercion requires is credibility. Your threat only works if your opponent believes you will actually follow through. And credibility is harder to establish than it sounds. A country that is threatened and not followed through, that has drawn red lines and watched them crossed, has depleted credibility. Its future threats are discounted. The other side calculates that the threat is probably empty because the previous threats were empty. The United States drew a red line in Syria over chemical weapons use in 2012. Chemical weapons were used. The red line was not enforced. Every subsequent American threat in every subsequent negotiation was worth slightly less than it had been before that moment. Credibility, once spent, is expensive to rebuild. This is the first mechanic. The threat only works if it costs you something to make it, and it will definitely cost you something if you don't follow through. North Korea understood this better than anyone. It watched what happened to Iraq after it abandoned its weapons program. It watched what happened to Libya after Gaddafi gave up his nuclear ambitions and cooperated with the West. Both regimes were eventually destroyed. North Korea concluded that the only credible deterrent was a capability so real that no threat against it would be followed through. It built that capability. Now nobody makes credible threats against North Korea because the credibility ran in the wrong direction. The second thing coercion requires is a clear ask. You need your target to know exactly what behavior change will make the threat go away. This sounds obvious. It is routinely violated. When the ask is unclear, when the other side doesn't know what concession would end the pressure, they have no path to compliance, even if they want one. The sanctions campaign against Iran provides a textbook example of this failure mode. For years, the Western ask kept changing. Stop enriching uranium. Stop at this percentage. Dismantle this facility. Accept these inspections. Each time Iran moved toward compliance with one version of the ask, a new version appeared. The result was predictable. Iran concluded that full compliance with any specific demand would be followed by a new demand, because the real objective wasn't the stated nuclear program, it was regime change. Once that conclusion was reached, coercion stopped working, because the target had no path to compliance that ended the pressure, and a pressure campaign with no exit ramp for the target becomes something different. It becomes a prolonged confrontation that neither side officially calls a war. Stay with me, because this is where the invisible war gets interesting. When conventional pressure fails, when the threat isn't credible or the ask isn't clear, sophisticated actors shift to a different tool. Gradual pressure applied below the threshold of what triggers a military response. This is called the gray zone. And it is where most of the significant geopolitical competition of the last 20 years has actually happened. China's expansion in the South China Sea wasn't a military operation. It was a construction project, island by island, reef by reef, facilities built incrementally, each step too small to justify a military response. The cumulative result being a fundamental change in who controls some of the most strategically important waters on Earth. No shots fired. Outcome changed permanently. And here is the detail that makes this so difficult to counter. Every individual step was deniable. Every individual step stayed below the threshold that triggers a military or diplomatic response. The international community debated each step in isolation. This reef, this installation, this patrol, while the cumulative picture assembled into something none of them were willing to contest as a whole. By the time the whole picture was visible, contesting it would have required reversing a decade of established facts. Nobody reversed them. Russia's strategy in Ukraine before 2022 followed the same logic, supporting separatist movements, creating facts on the ground, maintaining ambiguity about involvement that made a clear military response politically difficult for the West to authorize. The gray zone works because military alliances and international law are built around clear thresholds. An invasion triggers a response. An attack triggers a response. A construction project doesn't. A political pressure campaign doesn't. Economic leverage applied gradually doesn't. Each individual action stays below the line. The cumulative effect crosses it entirely. Here's the third tool, and the one that gets least attention in the official accounts: economic pressure. The ability to cause enough economic pain to force a decision without firing a single weapon. Sanctions are the obvious version, but they are also the bluntest and often least effective version, because broad sanctions hurt civilian populations more than decision makers, and hurt civilian populations in ways that often strengthen the regime rather than undermining it. The sophisticated version of economic coercion is targeted. It identifies the specific economic flows that the decision-making class depends on, not the general economy. The specific interests of the specific people who can change the behavior you want changed. This requires intelligence, patience, and a willingness to apply pressure over years rather than weeks. It also requires something most governments are unwilling to provide: consistency. Economic coercion fails when the pressure is applied and then relieved before the behavior change is complete. The other side learns that waiting out the pressure is a viable strategy. The next round of coercion is discounted before it starts. Credibility again. Every tool of coercion has the same dependency at its core. The other side must believe you will maintain the pressure long enough to make compliance the better option. The moment they believe you won't, the moment domestic politics, economic cost, or alliance fatigue makes them think the pressure will eventually ease, the leverage disappears. And here is why this matters for understanding every major geopolitical competition you'll read about for the next decade. The United States, China, and Russia are not primarily competing with weapons. They are competing with strategic credibility. Who has made credible commitments that they will maintain under pressure? Who has demonstrated that they follow through? Who has shown the domestic political capacity to sustain a strategy over election cycles, economic downturns, and public attention spans? China has been remarkably consistent. Its South China Sea strategy took decades. Its economic leverage over trading partners was built over decades. Its Belt and Road infrastructure investments, creating economic dependencies that become political leverage, were designed on a 30-year timeline. The United States changes strategy with administrations. That inconsistency is itself a strategic vulnerability. An adversary that understands coercion doesn't need to defeat American military power. It needs to outlast American strategic patience, which is exactly the same logic the small country uses against the superpower, just applied in the economic and political domain rather than the military one. This is how wars get won without being fought. And this is why the conflicts that matter most in the next decade won't look like wars. They'll look like trade disputes, infrastructure investments, election interference, diplomatic pressure, energy dependency. The slow accumulation of leverage that never triggers the threshold for a military response, but changes what countries can and cannot do. If you don't understand the mechanics of coercion, these events look disconnected. Once you understand them, they're chapters in the same book. Not through superior firepower, through superior understanding of what actually determines whether the other side changes its behavior. Force is one input into that calculation. Credibility, clarity, consistency, and time are the others. And the fifth, the one that determines whether all the others work, is patience. The willingness to maintain a strategy across election cycles, economic downturns, changing administrations, and shifting public attention. Patience is the rarest strategic resource in democratic systems, which is precisely why authoritarian systems with longer planning horizons have a structural advantage in gray zone competition, not because their strategies are better designed, but because they can sustain them longer without the pressure of domestic accountability. The countries that have mastered all five don't need to fire a shot. The countries that rely only on firepower keep winning battles and losing the larger competition. That's not an accident. It's the strategy working exactly as designed, just not by the side that expected to win.